Good afternoon. Who could hear me say good afternoon? Great. Oh, that was perfect. Thank you so much. We are very excited to get going today. My name is Don Shute, and I'm in the Office of Human Resource Development in the Office of Human Resources. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Big Learning Event co-hosts, partners, staff, and volunteers, and really express our great appreciation for you joining us today and tomorrow, for some what we think are really, really exciting opportunities for dialogue, opportunities for thinking, opportunities for reflection, and certainly opportunities for then beginning to figure out how we translate what we get from today into the work that we do every day. Before we jump very far into it, we are also very happy to have one of our campus leaders here joining us today to actually give you the official campus kickoff. In a few minutes, or in a second here, I'm going to invite Daryl Bazell to come up. Daryl has been the Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration at UW-Madison for 10 and a half years, almost exactly 10 and a half years, although I'm sure he's not counting at all. And Daryl is recognized for his leadership and innovation on campus, so it made perfect sense that to have him come welcome you and ask you to join in as we jump into the next couple days is both a great opportunity and honor for us. So please help me in welcoming Daryl.
Great. Thanks so much, Don. He and I were actually doing some calculations before we came up here, and I want you to know that I'm actually only 1.2 years on this campus in dog years. So it's not been long at all, just a short time. But I do want to say thanks to all of you for being here, to be part of what I think is going to be an exciting and wonderful event. So welcome formally to 2013 Big Learning event. What a distinguished group of presenters you're going to hear from today and tomorrow. This is an event that holds just great promise, both in terms of personal growth and development, but also in terms of what it can do to spur on further campus innovation. Harry Webney-Bierman, where's Harry at? One of our event sponsors, so Harry's in the back. Harry, yeah, and he does deserve a round of applause. Harry describes the big learning event as unique mosh pit of minds. But he further says that it's with good manners. And so who couldn't be drawn to an event like that, right? And so we're going to get into the mental mosh pit, if you will, in just a moment or two. If you think about this event today, though, and tomorrow, think about it in two other contexts. Think about it as a mixture of tradition and a mixture of cutting-edge thinking. Tradition is pretty simple. Think about our rich history and traditions around sifting and winnowing. Great example of that through this event. But clearly our speakers bring diverse backgrounds, different academic disciplines they bring to the table. The idea and the opportunity for cross-disciplinary learning is clearly really what this event is all about. An opportunity to stretch the boundaries. These conversations are part of what I think of as our continuing evolution around the idea around interdisciplinary thinking and practice. And certainly as we have these kinds of discussions, our capacity and ability to take on large, complex challenges increases. So I think this is just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And not just that, I think the timing is just perfect. Semester's over, an opportunity just to reflect, get away from the day-to-day, and really take an opportunity, again, for that personal growth and development, but also developing those tools and thoughts to help move this campus forward strategically. The organizer of the event, and you just met Harry, they want to bring important thought leaders to the table, folks who really can and have made an impact in our world. No question that as you hear from our speakers today, they've delivered big time on that promise. So I think you'll be very impressed with the speakers. And again, think about today's event, though. Its success is not just dependent upon what they're going to share with you, but it's really dependent upon your engagement with them today and tomorrow. A lot's being asked of you. We need you to take advantage of the opportunity to ask questions, to offer your own thoughts and comments, your insights, and we need you fully engaged throughout this conference. So think about this as being highly interactive, a creative experience for sure, but it's really up to you and your participation that will determine the success of the event itself. So like you, I'm looking forward to an exciting, engaging, and provocative couple of days. I do want to close by not just thanking Harry, but also thanking the many others who came together, Don and others, to help make today and tomorrow's event a great success. Too many names to mention, but I would invite you to take a look at the back of your program for a list of those individuals and thank them today and tomorrow as you have that opportunity. So with that, I want to conclude by just saying thanks. I wish you well at the event, and I'm sure it's going to be a great success. So I'm going to turn things back over to Don to kick things off.
So this is called the big learning event, and we're very intentional in that. We decided we didn't want the small learning event or the kinda learning event. What we were looking for was really the big learning event, and the big learning event has so much to do with big ideas, big thoughts, and in many ways, a big amount of interaction. Okay, not great English, but I know that that still is our key as to how we're going to get all of us together by the end to be thinking, talking about some of the ideas, and pushing ideas around and thinking more about those ideas as they play out. Our plan for the next day or so is to provoke powerful dialogue and conversations through multiple experiences. We have some really wonderful experienced speakers who are joining us from both near and far. And we're hoping as we engage over the next day or so that you'll have an opportunity not just to be participating by listening, but by participating in a lot of other ways. And to do that, I just wanted to point out and have you look at the schedule, if you would, for 1 second. So this is the aerobic activity. You could find your program that you received on the way in. If you raise it above your head, you've now done aerobics for today. So that's, I think, the last highly aerobic activity. It is above your head, and if you breathe heavily, it's kind of like exercise. But if you would please turn to page 2. On page 2 of this, I just want to start off and look a little bit at the schedule ahead. At page 2, starting just in a very short time, we've asked each of the speakers to briefly share with us what is on their minds. What are those ideas from their fields of study that we should be paying attention to? You'll see from the speaker bios that we have speakers from really very different fields, and we try to figure out how can we get as diverse a group of people together to talk about ideas, to see what themes come out among the conversations that we're going to be having. We're going to hear a lot more about their thoughts this afternoon in actually 2 rounds. One is Ideas to Change the World, round 1, and Ideas to Change the World, round 2. Also exciting this afternoon is a final round where we've asked the speakers to come up and engage with each other and with us. In that engagement, we'll be looking for, again, both the similarities in some of the ideas that are coming out, but also what are some of the unique distinctions that we can look at and understand better. As a part of that exchange, we'll be having all the speakers. You can see 5 seats up here. We'll be inviting all the speakers to come up during that period of time and really have an ongoing dialogue with them. As we look ahead to tomorrow, just a couple notes. One note is tomorrow we begin at 8:30, but your beginning site is either in this building or it's at Celery Hall. And Celery Hall is just across the walkway. So it's all in the same block. But part of what you'll see is there are some concurrent sessions. And as we look at the concurrent conversations, they're broken out by speaker. And what we wanted to do at this opportunity, at both these opportunities, really was to look in greater depth at some of the individual ideas from each of the speakers. So this is really a mix of kind of bursts of information, some dialogue, some more greater depth at the conversations, and then following that up with bringing the speakers back together tomorrow afternoon, and actually beginning even tomorrow at 11 o'clock for some provocative possibilities sessions, and talking about what do we do with some of these ideas? What are some of those emerging key themes and insights that you've had, that they've had, as they come together then thinking later in the afternoon about how do we move forward as a public university? What do we do with these ideas that makes it practical and play out? So we're very excited about that schedule. One of the things we're also excited about is you have multiple opportunities to be involved, multiple opportunities to be engaged in participating with each other. The first and foremost is we hope you take every opportunity you can to turn to somebody next to you and just say hello. Just say welcome. In fact, let's just practice that once. Turn to somebody you don't know really quickly and say, hi, welcome, glad you're here. That was fantastic. I shouldn't have done that. Now I know we'll never come back together as a large group, will we? Let's try this. If you could hear me, please clap once. That's wonderful. So every once in a while, you want to make sure you show appreciation. That was really clapping that you got to meet some other new people, and we hope that that continues throughout the rest of the time that you're with us today and tomorrow. We really do, and we are very serious about that. The idea of how we stay engaged differently than maybe other events we've been to, maybe differently than other events you've been to, is of a very important nature to us, because we don't think that this learning can occur in a one-way sort of direction. We think that the learning, and as you'll probably hear from some of our speakers today, this idea of how we begin to create these communities of learning together really is what's important and critical to the work that we do. So we hope that you create that at your table. We hope you create that with the people around you today. If you were wondering, have you provided any tools for us to do this? Well, you know, funny, you got your booklets out. If you turn to page 4. Page 4 in your booklet, and if you can't find the booklet, there are also these table tents on your table that will talk with you about this. There are a lot of different ways that you could share your ideas both while things are going on and at those moments of reflection that we'll provide. One of the first is you can see that we have an opportunity to post comments, reactions, any observations you have on the BLE blog. You might hear BLE, that's our short version for Big Learning Event. You might see on our BLE blog that there's access to dialogue. You can also connect via social media on Twitter or Facebook. If you're the kind of person that didn't bring an electronic device, or you are desperately trying to avoid electronic devices while you're here, then there are sheets of paper on your tables, and you can post your comments. We have a wall of ideas over there. If you hadn't noticed it before, it just got lit up. It was like a miracle almost. The light went on over there, just like I had an idea and the wall lit up. It's really just incredible how that worked. So we are very excited to have that wall of ideas. Part of what we'll be doing throughout the event is there's a group that's called the Theme Team, and that group will be watching the social media, and we'll be talking with others, and we'll be ready to kind of begin to use those ideas. We'll be interacting with the moderators that you'll meet in a second, and we'll be able to begin to continuously kind of feed in your feedback, your reactions. We'll do glimpses at the wall every now and again and get those up. So you'll be connected by what you put in back into this event. So we're pretty excited at that possibility. One note, you can also, if you ever feel moved at some point that you'd like to go post something yourself on the wall, please feel free to do that. We'd invite you to do that. One of the other really exciting things is that we did this event one time about 2 years ago, and this is our second time we're doing it. At that time, we had some very gifted and talented faculty members who agreed to moderate for us over the day and a half that we were together. And one of the most exciting things was we looked at these powerful conversations that we have moving ahead for this day and a half sessions, was that we went back to those same gifted and talented faculty members, and they agreed to come join us again. And so we are really, really excited to have Patrick Sims and Kathy Kramer-Walsh join us to help moderate and keep things moving at the front up here and ask those provoking questions, and really to help move this along in a way that we found last time was just incredibly productive. And I'd just like to ask them to stand for a second because I'll introduce them one at a time. And that is just one symbol of the great collective group that came together to really pull this off today. A lot of different departments, a lot of different hosts, a lot of us coming together to make this happen. So while Daryl mentioned a couple, really would encourage you to look at the back. A lot of partners, a lot of co-hosts came together to make this happen. Now on to our moderators just a little bit. Patrick Sims is a talented writer, performer, and teacher in the Department of Theater and Drama. If you ask anybody who's been around campus for any period of time, you know that if they've had the opportunity to interact with Patrick, they've left with high energy, left with a lot of real positive feelings and good experiences, and also having been provided an opportunity to be very reflective and thoughtful. So one of the things that we're so excited that he and Kathy both are joining us again, because they both have some of those similar characteristics as we move ahead in this event. Kathy Kramer-Walsh is an award-winning teacher and go-to expert on communication and public engagement, particularly as it relates to politics and public opinion. She comes to us from the Department of Political Science, and again, I can't say how lucky we feel to have them join us again for this event and have them join with you to make this all happen in the next couple of days. So with that, I'd like to also say one more additional welcome to our speakers. They were so gracious to come join us. They came from a lot of different places. They took time out of their schedules, and the time that they're here with us is not the only time that they worked on this. They were working over the last 6 months to get us information, to move things along, and we can't say how appreciative that we are that our speakers have been willing to join us and make this the exciting event that we know it'll be. So with that, I'd like to welcome you again to the big learning event, and on behalf of the entire planning team, thank you for your participation. And at this point, if you would help me to invite Patrick to the stage.
Am I on? Testing, 1, 2. Hello. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. See, y'all know. I think if you've ever heard me introduce or say anything before, I often start events like this. I say, hey, I come from a tradition that's called call and response. I issue a call, you respond. So I'll try that again. I'm coming up the stairs. Am I on? Testing, 1, 2. Hello. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Welcome to the Big Learning Event 2013. I'm so excited to be here. I want to give a special thank you to Darren, Harry, and Don for bringing me and Kathy back. We get to reprise our roles as Oprah and Phil. You figure out which one we're going to be. I don't know. I could be Oprah. I could be Phil. But I just want to start by offering a thanks for the minds that got together to try and make this thing happen. And we have 5 amazing speakers that are going to be with us this afternoon and tomorrow. And I'll just start off by introducing 2 of them. The first of which is Mr. Saleem Ali. Mr. Saleem Ali is the director of the Center for Social Responsibility and Mining at the University of Queensland, Australia, and professor of environmental studies at the University of Vermont's Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources. He is also adjunct faculty. It just went black on me. That's because I can restart it here. Technology, gotta love it. Mr. Ali is also an adjunct faculty member of Brown University's Watson Institute for International Studies. He's involved in many nonprofit organizations that promote environmental peace building. He works to find ways to use and protect the Earth's resources as wisely as possible. Our second guest this afternoon for this first segment is Ms. Jill Tarter. While Saleem concentrates on the Earth, Jill has her head in the stars for most of her life. But instead of wool gathering, she's listening and looking for intelligent life out there in the great beyond. She has received a Lifetime Achievement Award from Women in Aerospace and 2 public service medals from NASA. Yeah, give it up. Yeah, that's good stuff. Yes. Ms. Tarter was also elected an AAAS Fellow in 2002 and a California Academy of Sciences Fellow in 2003. Ms. Tarter was the inspiration for Carl Sagan's novel Contact, which was made into a film starring Ms. Jodie Foster. And if you happen to know Ms. Foster, call me. We can. Yeah. So please, a warm round of applause for Mr. Saleem Ali and Ms. Jill Tarter. Now, as they make their way to the stage, the way we're going to handle this first segment, Saleem is going to talk for about 20 minutes. Then we'll have about 5 minutes in between Saleem's talk and Jill's discussion. If you're so moved and inspired, you can add things to the wall of ideas. Feel free to use Twitter, any of the technological resources that you have at your disposal to share your thoughts and ideas. After that, Ms. Tarter is going to speak. She'll have about 20 minutes as well, and we'll repeat that process another 5 minutes. Then we're going to have a conversation with both of them together. Does that sound like a plan? Yeah. Excellent. Please.
Thank you. All right, checking the mic. Everyone can hear me? Yes. Splendid. Well, I'm delighted to be back in Madison after 15 years. I was here during my doctoral days. In fact, my first book, one of the case studies I looked at was a mining project in northern Wisconsin. So I'm happy to say not much has changed in Madison, but perhaps quite a bit is changing on the mining landscape, but that can come during discussion. So what I'll try to do is breeze through some of the key ideas which were presented in my response paper in 20 minutes. But it'll be hard to cover most of that, so I would urge you to still maybe browse through that again and make the connections accordingly. I am quite an avid Twitter user, so if those of you who are Twitterati should perhaps connect. And if you'd like to continue the conversation on these themes, you'll see that beyond the learning event, Twitter will be a good way to follow the conversation. In terms of, okay, let's see if this is cooperating. technical help on the... Aha. This is the... I've got... Is it the other one? Yep, okay. Let's see. It's not pointing towards... Well, it's not... it doesn't seem to have a battery on that one. So maybe if someone at the back can help us, should I just give you a wave or something and then you'll... Okay, that's fine, okay. So, all right, yep, let's start off then with, first of all, our species. What makes us different when we think about our relationship to resources? So, in the spirit of alliteration, you'll see that I've tried to make some connections here. So the first aspect of what makes us different is that we collect. We're collectors. We love to go and find things, and we find some satisfaction in that. Understanding what our relationship is to collection is essential to understanding our relationship to resources. We then also covet. We want to often not just collect, but we want to keep things for ourselves. The whole institution of ownership developed partly as a result of that. Then we like to carry and transport what we covet, right? And there are certain attributes of human behavior around migration patterns, on the need to have change in the vistas that we cover, or we want to see the landscapes change in our lives. That also makes our relationship to resources pivotally important. And then finally, we are quite unique in terms of species who consume beyond biological need. And understanding what need is really is going to be pivotal to understanding our relationship to resources. And whether we call that greed, perhaps, the relationship between need and greed is going to be important in how we are able to move forward in that regard. Now, a quick question. 10,000 years ago, something special happened. What happened 10,000 years ago in terms of human history that's really seminally important? Agriculture, exactly. And what do we call that sometimes? We call it the Neolithic Revolution, perhaps. It's what the geneticist Spencer Wells has called Pandora's seed. And that book, even though it has some interesting aspects to it, I actually wrote a rather scathing review of it in Science, so which you're welcome to read the Science review. But you will see in my conversations what my problems were with that book. Essentially, the book said that that 10,000 year ago advent, when humans started to engage in agriculture, that was where, as the name suggests, the seeds of our environmental ecological decline started. And after that, we've been basically trying to dig a bigger grave for ourselves. And I feel as though, in some ways that argument can lead to what we may call a teleology of doom, which I tend not to ascribe to, even though there are some very important ideas there. So the Neolithic Revolution, we moved beyond subsistence. Now, subsistence, generally, when environmentalists think about subsistence, what are the kinds of images that come to mind, usually? Is it subsistence, is it good? How many of you would have a positive view if I said subsistence? No? Really? That's interesting for Wisconsin. I would have thought, growing your own food, you're quite celebrated as a state for being self-reliant in your backyards and growing your own food and all. Well, that's what subsistence to some degree is. Well, subsistence clearly at one level is a good thing. In most cases, subsistence has positive attributes. But there is a darker side of subsistence, which we often neglect. And that subsistence leads to, if you carry it to the extreme, it leads to a very selfish existence. Why? Because ultimately, if you're completely subsistence-oriented, you're focused on just having enough for your family, or enough for your clan, or enough for your village, and you're not contributing to the larger experience of human development. And that 10,000 year ago advent that allowed agriculture to occur, to move away from just subsistence lifestyles, it also allowed professions to develop. It also allowed for us to think about human development in a different way, not just providing enough for our families, but thinking about the whole species and its development trajectory. So that is a very important context in terms of our resource relationships. Now, moving fast forward from 10,000 years to John Maynard Keynes and his insights, the economist Keynes, most of you are familiar with, much revered, much reviled. But in terms of his seminal work, A Treatise on Money, there are these two quotations which are worth considering. What basically Keynes is saying in these quotations is, imagine the trajectory of different human communities if you didn't have that relationship to resources. So imagine the relationship of a place like Cyprus. Cyprus, what do we associate with now? Well, yes, the banking crisis. But Cyprus, at one time, was the heartland for the world's copper industry. And even now, I mean, if you go back in that period that Keynes is referring to, Cyprus was a major copper producer. And the trajectory of Cyprus's development had a lot to do with its connection with resources and how people develop. So where our paths will take us as a species and how human development occurs is inextricably linked to our relationship to the elements of the earth. My first degree was in chemistry, and I always want to remind an audience that ultimately we are connected to the elements. And I think that's a point certainly which Jill and I would concur on, whether it is, Sagan saying that we're all star stuff, or we have that intrinsic relationship with the elements which we shouldn't forget. And accounting for that, understanding it, finding metrics for that is something which we often do neglect, right? The minerals, even food ultimately needs minerals, the elements, and understanding that what kind of elements those are. So let's think of it now at another scale. Cities. These three cities, San Francisco, Melbourne, Johannesburg, what do they have in common? All of them had some relationship to a metal which we often don't associate with any human need, but was a very important element in the context of human development and settlement, and that's gold, right? All three of those cities developed around gold to some degree. Venice, Timbuktu, and Salzburg, what do they have in common? Pardon? Salt, yes, the German speakers should have a bit of an edge there. Salzburg, right? Yeah. But yes, all three of them have a relationship to salt in terms of a mineral which was very important for the development path there. Venice, the Venetians, were able to perfect the path of extracting salt from seawater and finding the optimum way of evaporation ponds and the like which would allow salt to be extracted. And that is why you were able to get the capital influx which led to Marco Polo and the famous Venetian navigators going around the world. Timbuktu, a major center for the salt trade in Africa, and certainly Salzburg, famous for the salt mines long before Mozart was known of there. But in fact, the reason why Mozart was able to have the patronage there was because there was so much wealth in Salzburg as a result of the salt mines. So the connection again with the other aspects of human development, music, and so on, as well with the minerals. Now, two Richards, a tale of two Richards. Dawkins, you probably know. Most of, at least the biologists would know who Richard Dawkins is, the famous author of The Selfish Gene. What people often don't know is that he's also the inventor of this term or concept of the meme, which is a kind of a cultural gene, so to speak. It's an area where Dawkins is willing to indulge in non-literal scientific inquiry, and so Richard Brodie, whom most of you probably don't know, was very interested in Dawkins' notion of memes. Now, what is Brodie's background? Anyone know where Brodie came from? Computer science connection there, perhaps. Brody is actually closer to your lives than Dawkins. Much closer to, I would argue, all of your lives. Why? Because he was the man who wrote the code for Microsoft Word, the most, the most widely used software program in human history, right? So Richard Brody made his fortune as the originator of Microsoft Word, and then, as with all these, tech tycoons, they sort of go off to reflect and pontificate on the world. And in his case, he went off to think about memes, and he wrote a book called Virus of the Mind, which was about the science of memes. And the basic question he was asking is, how does a resource fashion infect society? Why is it that sometimes in Japan, pearls, I'm very pleased to see one of our speakers is wearing pearls, because I think pearls are particularly important elements. One of my current research projects is around pearls, because they're the only renewable gemstones. But sadly, they're not much in fashion in the US. But in Japan, pearls are the big deal, Mikimoto and so on. Why was it that this particular resource had a certain viral propensity in Japan but not here, right? So those are interesting questions which need to be addressed, both in order for us to think about sustainability in the larger context. And then the connections of what an impact one action has in one case, what Edward Lorenz has famously termed in this quotation, does the flap of a butterfly's wing in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? The connections which occur, complex systems interactions. That has a lot to do with also how human resource fashions spread and the relationship that has on sustainability, right? Now, if you think about then wealth generation more broadly, we have to think about what leads to then certain kinds of societies using their resources wisely and developing, and then others not doing so, or those which initially use them wisely moving into a direction where they didn't, okay? So in the case of the United States, the economic historian at Stanford, Gavin Wright, has said that the United States, for much of its history, until recently, one might argue, has used its extractive resources in a way in which they've been able to develop a much broader economy. And the key operative words there were in terms of learning, investment, technological progress. So those, and then to some degree, cost reduction for the business people, that would be important to keep in mind. But the investment that the US made in using those resources and investing them in learning, in terms of the number of higher education institutions and so on, and then the connection there with technological progress also has a lot to do with immigration, and then cost reduction, of course, efficiency led to that. So that has historically been a way in which societies have successfully harnessed resources to move in that development path that's going to lead to more than just their own community developing, but the broader development. But there are always darker sides to that if you go too much in one direction, and each one of those, one would argue, has some self-correcting mechanism in it. Because if you want learning, you are going to learn what the thresholds are, whether it's carrying capacity or whatever that is. That's why the quest for knowledge must always go on. Investment more generally in terms of what kind of capitals you invest, not just financial capital, human capital, social capital. Technological progress, much as many environmentalists think that there is a tendency for technology to make us complacent, ultimately, if we're living in a pluralistic society where we cannot force people not to have more than 2 children or whatever the resource constraint issue might be, the only salvation we have is technology, so we better grow to love it and not become anti-technology. If you want a pluralistic society, technology may be your only salvation. And then cost reduction ultimately can lead to a feedback mechanism which is going to lead people to find other sources and incentives for change. Now, the thing with resources, though, and resource economies is that they lead to both monopolistic and monopsonistic competition. Monopoly, people know generally. Monopoly is a situation generally where you have only one seller or a buyer. When you have one seller of a resource, right? whereas a monopsony is a situation where you have one buyer of a resource. So in the case of a mining company, for example, extractive industries, you get that situation. That's why you get then accumulation of capital many times around these. So now I'm moving from the big picture to some of the operational issues that happen. So you know about the story of the Rockefellers, Carnegies. All these people had something to do with the resource industries which led to them. Oil, steel, Guggenheim, people know of the museum, but Guggenheim made his money in lead mining in Colorado. Pew, the Pew Charitable Trust, people often think they have a lot to do with church charities, Pews, but they actually, Pew was the man behind Sun Oil Company. And if you go to the tar sands in Fort McMurray, Alberta, where I've been, there's a center which was started by Pew, who discovered actually the tar sands. Oppenheimer, clearly you know about from the diamond tycoon in South Africa. Reinhardt is the latest Australian heiress, Gina Reinhardt. Now, if you think about these other people in the technology side, in the service sector, there are lots of them. So what happens is with resources, because they're primary resources, you create monopoly and monopsony in a few people. You accumulate wealth and you create more inequality. Whereas with other sectors, you can have a more breadth in the level of resource usage. So that has to be kept in mind in terms of how individual wealth gets accumulated. And then the philanthropic economies which develop as a result of that. All those people have foundations named after them in some form or another. What incentives does that create? And how we think about some of the political debates that occur then in terms of deliberative democracy versus allowing philanthropy to take care of healthcare or whatever it may be. Lots of connections, and they're going back to the elements. So it's the democracy of commerce. It's what, this is the quotation from Victoria de Grazia's book, Irresistible Empire. And President Woodrow Wilson, I don't have time to go into this in much detail now, but I'll leave it as a teaser for you to ponder, and maybe we can go into it in more detail. But there has been this notion also in terms of that if you are able to create a homogeneous culture through some kind of a democracy of commerce, the idea that President Woodrow Wilson had, who was really the only university president, as far as I know, who became a U.S. president. He was the president of Princeton University. He had this idea, actually, of using that democracy of commerce to create cooperation and reduce conflict in societies, or what Thomas Friedman has said, the Golden Arches theory of conflict prevention, which is a little bit more disturbing, perhaps, a manifestation of that any two countries, supposedly Friedman argues, that any two countries which have McDonald's will not go to war with each other. But that's how he stated it. That's why I get concerned about simplistic journalistic narratives at times. But with regard to planned obsolescence, then moving from what we have to do in our society is moving from wealth, we have to basically get rid of a concept of waste if we are to be able to transition then in terms of our connection to resources. And that's what I'm trying to do in my work now, is to get companies, for example, mining companies, to think about not just mining, but being a material service provider. Because no one cares whether you got your copper from the mine or you got your copper from a recycled penny to a large degree. But you need a complete cultural shift around that, and all those other connections with resources which occur as a result of it. Now, what is the durability conundrum? The durability conundrum has to do with that we are living in a society when we build a product and we're dependent on livelihoods. If you have something that is disposable, it's creating a recurring source of income. So to have a recurring source of income, a livelihood, you want to have something that is therefore going to be disposable, right? Because if you have something durable, it lasts a long time, and then people are not going to be buying it, and if they're dependent on their livelihood for buying it, this is the conundrum that Obama had to deal with, and the previous President Obama had to deal with this very much in the situation with job creation in the last election. Because on the one hand, if you want sustainability, you want to have more durable products and you want to have less of an output, but in order to create livelihoods which are focused through jobs in particular manufacturing fields, you need to have something which is constantly either people are buying, or what's the option then around that? a reconfiguring of our relationship to materials, how those materials are then reused and brought back. Now, that's still not as efficient from the environmental perspective as just small is beautiful living. But if you're living in a world where you do have to provide for so many people in terms of livelihood, you have to come up with some kind of a hybridity in your choices. Because you can't eat the cake and have it too. You can't live in a bubble in Wisconsin and think that the rest of the world is going to go away. The connections are ultimately going to be there. So that's going to have to change if we are going to move forward. Okay? And the service sector is going to have to play a very important role in that. And the relationship between the service sector and the resource base has to be made much more connected. So this is my last slide. I'm going to leave you with the thought that ultimately the problem is this situation we have. We are dependent in global decision-making on the Westphalian nation-state model, ultimately, right? Because countries are the units of analysis. You look at a World Bank report, everything is written up by countries. You look at a UNDP report, countries. Treaties, countries. You can't have global decision-making outside countries, the concept of countries. So what do? Then we have to adapt our governance mechanisms in terms of our relationship to resources and countries. This is a graph which is showing the potential. This was done by the World Economic Forum, which is showing countries in 3 different tiers. The first tier is countries which have the potential for using their mineral wealth in a way to grow the most. We are living in a world of tremendous inequality, and resources are distributed in different parts of the world. Human resources are distributed in different parts of the world. So we have to think about how can we ultimately find ways that resources can connect to development. So those tier 1 countries are where the resources have the most potential to create development, right? So countries like Mongolia, which has a very large mineral resource wealth, has been relatively poor and could suddenly get much better. Countries like in tier 2 are in the middle range, with there's a more diversified economy, there's a bit of the service sector and a bit of the manufacturing sector, and there is still some potential. So you have countries like Kazakhstan and others who have that, or some of them are also ones where if you don't have that many minerals to begin with, you don't have the basic primary resources of the earth to begin with, and so then what do? You have to, that's why the potential is less. And then tier 3 countries finally are the ones where you've got the least potential for the primary resource base. Now, this is interesting that both actually all 3 of my countries of connection right now are in that. So, I'm a US citizen, originally from Pakistan, living in Australia now, and all 3 are in those. What's similar? I mean, otherwise Pakistan and the US are usually not put in the same category, right? So in this case, they are. And the reason is because the US has already developed a lot, and the potential for its primary resources leading to further development is relatively low. And Pakistan, because of various other factors, it does have resources, but it doesn't have the same level of investment interest because of other issues of conflict and so on. So it can't depend on its primary resources to create development. So they're in the same category in terms of the primary base being used. So from an analysis perspective, what we need to do is figure out then, how can we, because as I've tried to argue in the last 20 minutes, ultimately the connection is to the mineral resources and the elements of the earth. How can we make that connection between the earth's resources and other sectors of the economy much better in order to create that development path which is more planetary, when we are stuck with country divisions, because we cannot make decision-making outside countries, right? Ultimately, even with the United Nations system, we are highly constrained by what we can do. So this is the challenge, that we are living in a world where resources are unequally distributed, income is unequally distributed, and our connections with the elements of the earth has been lost. So what my work is trying to do is making those connections again in a nuanced way, with no silver bullet, but through tough, hard analysis and individually catering to particular community contexts, so that we can ultimately develop a more planetary vision of the future. Thank you.
Excellent. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take about 5 minutes for you to think about what you just heard, and do feel free to use all of the resources at your disposal, the wall of ideas, Twitter, Facebook, or posting on the BLE page. Thank you.